What's up Flutter aliens, welcome back to another video of Flutter and Firebase Developer Bootcamp, this time week 5. And in today's video, we are going to implement the data layer of status feature and also will create the Cubits and lastly to inject the status feature classes in the injection container. And in the next video, we will go ahead to bind all the logic back to the UI. So without wasting much of our time, let's get started. So first thing first with the status feature. We're gonna go and create the directories inside the status feature, the data layer. So inside the data layer, we're gonna have the remote, where will goes the remote and the remote data source implementation, and will be another directory of models and one more repository. That's it. Inside the repository, we're gonna have, already, status repository impl, which means implementation. And here we are going to have a class. This time this won't be abstract because this is going to be an implementation class, and this is going to implement the methods of the repository we have in the domain layer here. So we will name it status repository implementation. Will be implementing status repository abstract class, and now to implement its overrides methods, and it's going to depend on the remote data source. So now we're gonna go and create the remote data source, status remote data source, also its implementation, status remote data source implementation. And yes, the names of the libraries and their classes names are a bit of mouthful but are also meaningful, so you also have to take care of this. No matter how long is name of any library, a Dart file, or whatever you're naming variables, functions, classes, but the point is they must be meaningful, so that when you just look at their names, so you recognize them, like what this specific variable, function, or a class is going to perform, or what task this is going to complete in our project that we are working with. So this is also included in the best practices of the software development, meaningful names of directories, variables, classes, and functions, and all of that. So we're gonna go and copy repository from here and paste it in here, change its name to status remote data source, and here will be a class of status remote data source implementation. Will be implementing status remote data source, and that's it. Let's override the missing methods, and the repository implementation is going to depend on the status remote data source, pass it in the constructor and must be required. And now we're gonna go ahead and call the methods from the remote data source, create status, and the same thing for the rest 7 methods implementations like this. So once the repository implementation is completed, we are gonna go to the remote data source implementation of the status, and this is going to again depend on the Firebase Firestore database, because we're using Firebase as the backend of our WhatsApp clone, and this can be any database that you're using, MongoDB, AWS, MySQL, or any database that you're using for your application in Flutter. So will be final Firebase Firestore, we're gonna name it like this and pass it in the constructor and make it required. Now here will go the real implementations. So we're gonna make it asynchronous, and first thing you already know, the reference to the collection, and here we got it, the collection reference of mapstring dynamic, and the status is coming from the Firebase collection constant you might remember from the first video, and here it is, the status. And now after this, since we will be creating the status, so for each status we are creating, it's going to have a unique ID, unique identifier. So we'll access it from the doc.id, so it will directly give us the random ID by doing just that from the document.id and will be stored inside the status.id. And next, the instance of the status model and passing the value to the parameters from the status entity that we will be calling in our UI, its use case, and we don't have the status model, so we cannot work with it further because we need the status model so that we can convert the data to some raw data to store it in the cloud file store, and if we need while retrieving it in the other methods, so we need to convert it back from raw data like JSON map string dynamic to the Dart object so that we can read and display it in our applications. So we are gonna go and just comment it out, and here we'll create the status model. That's it. Now will be a class status model, will be extend status entity, and here we'll go to same fields and it's going to pass them in the constructor but won't be required, but will be in the named parameters, and is going to do the super and pass the values in the super. Let's import the timestamp in here, not creating the class but the timestamp. And here we got the status image entity, will goes the status id as status id, image URL will be image URL, and the same for others. And then two methods that we need for the status model to document or to JSON, and also the from snapshot. So first we got the from snapshot method in the status model. We are doing the same thing as we were doing with the previous models of the user and the chat, and the returning of the status model is also the same, but one thing that is different is for the list we are doing this thing for the list of status image entity. So since we have the list of status image entity object, so while retrieving the data from the cloud file store, we need to convert each single item of the list from JSON to the Dart object. So we will be doing it by extracting the snap stories as we are doing for the others as list, and in their stories data variable we are mapping to each item so that we can get its keys, and we got the key in the element, and we are calling the status image entity from JSON method here from to convert each object inside the list from JSON to the Dart object and converting it back to the list so that each item is converted into the object and passing them to the status model as list in here. So this is going to work like this since we are working with the list of status image entity. So this was the only difference that I show you how we are gonna work with the list of objects when we have one in our model. So this is the method from snapshot, which is going to convert the data from snapshot to the Dart object so that we can read it in our application and display it in some list view or the way we want it. So the next method is going to be to document method, and the rest are the same, only the stories is different. So same like that, we are mapping each story item, and when you got its value we are converting each story to the JSON and converting it again the whole story to the list so that each item inside the list is converted into JSON so that we can store it in our cloud file store database in that raw format, and while retrieving it we will convert each from snapshot to the Dart object so that we can read it in our application. So that's what it's happening in the status model. So once we have this, we can go ahead and uncomment this status model and import this now, and now this is going to work. And next step in the create status is going to be, first we have a variable of status document reference where we are storing the data on the status ID and we are requesting a get. And we got the document snapshot of map string dynamic. Then we are checking if the document already exists on that UID. What you have to do, if it's not exist, this means then you have to set it, otherwise return and do nothing. That was it for the creating the status. Next, to delete it, it's pretty simple. Just add the asynchronous, then access to the collection, then simply on the specific UID call the delete method on that specific document with that status ID, and that's it. Now get my status. So here things are going to get interesting in this part, because we are gonna run some queries in the Firebase, and it's going to deal with to just give us that status that is within the last 24 hours, so that our status will only last for 24 hours and then it will disappear, which means that it won't get that specific status of the users, or if it's our status, it won't be deleted from the cloud file store database. It will remain in there, and neither its image will be deleted from the Firebase storage. But what will happen only in here, it will not get that if the specific query is not matched, which we are going to write in the get my status, also get my status feature, and the get statuses to get the status of the other users. So if you also want that real functionality, like when the 24 hours completes of a specific status and you want to delete it from the cloud file store, also the deleting the image of it from the Firebase storage, so we have to set the cloud tasks. We have to write the cloud functions, and in there we have to schedule a TTL, time to live data, and when the 24 hours completes, the cloud task will be triggered, and then these tasks will be performed in the backend side. So if you also want to learn how we can make any document time to live, so you can use the Firebase TTL data, and also you can watch this playlist where I taught how to write cloud functions inside the cloud tasks to make the fast store document TTL or whatever scheduling you want in your application. So I explained everything from A to Z, so you can watch this playlist, and if you have any questions then let me know that how you can deal with the scheduling task in Flutter. And I also show a Flutter application where I implemented this. So here I just write the backend code and deal with the scheduling task. So if you want to learn, so you can simply watch that and let me know if you have any questions. Anyways, let's get back to the video, and the get my status here is going to deal with first thing to access the collection, and we will do where after the status collection has been accessed. So we got the query this time of mapstring dynamic, where the UID is equal to the UID we will be passing since we are getting the my status. So we also have to run the where query in the backend so that only that status will be gotten in the list, and we will simply exit by doing list.first, so that our status will be included in that list in the stream, so that we can get it like that. And we will also do .limit will be 1, and since we're gonna have a lot of statuses in the cloud file store database and some might be expired, so we're gonna go and also implement the update methods here, so you'll get to know how the process is going to work. So we're gonna run where query, which is going to load the status based on our ID if the UID was equal to the UID that we will be passing, which means that the current user ID, and the limit will be 1. And next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna run one more where query, this time based on the create at. And what we are doing in here, we are saying if the created at, which means that whenever the specific status is created, is greater than the date time that now subtract the 24 hours. So what we are simply doing in here, the created at will be the time of, for example, today, and then the date time right now, for example, again today, and today minus 24 hours, which means that we are going back 24 hours from now time, so that which means it's equal to yesterday, and we go back 24 hours from the current time, and now until the created at is greater than this time. So obviously it would be greater than, since here we have the yesterday and it's today. So once this yesterday time reaches to the created at, or the 24 hours has been passed, so this condition will become false, and after 24 hours you will no longer be allowed to see the status in here. So that was one query, in here. And after that, while returning the query mapstring dynamic, we also have to run one more query for balancing efficiency and accuracy to fetch only the statuses that are within the last 24 hours. We are returning the status collection dot snapshots, which means that the data in the stream, we are mapping each snapshot, query snapshot as mapstring dynamic, the query snapshot accessing the documents, and again we are running the where in the client side when the data is retrieved, and on each document we are accessing the created at time and again converting it to that and saying is after that time right now, again going back 24 hours in the time, which means yesterday. And this is the same thing that we are doing in here, going back 24 hours and doing the filtering of the my status, and the same will be for this and also the get statuses for of the other users. So this second filter is just for balancing efficiency with accuracy to fetch only the statuses that are within the last 24 hours. So if you have any better idea of writing this logic, so please implement it also, and also let me know in the comment section. Anyways, the same will go for this. We're gonna copy this code and we'll paste it in here and everything will remain the same. And I'm gonna copy this thing also, since it's just for getting my status. And yes, we'll obviously get an error because we are returning the future list of status entity, and doing the snapshot for this is obviously a problem. So we're gonna just do get, and instead of mapping the snapshot, query snapshot, we will do then, and we are good to go with this. Now the same thing will go for the other one. We're going to copy everything and paste it in here. The only thing that will not be in here is where query, because we are not fetching the status for only one user and we are not fetching the only one status, so that these things will be removed and everything will remain the same. And that was for the getting statuses, and we're done with that. Now we are with the scene status update. So whenever we open up a status, so we will be able to see the stories inside that specific status that we have created here in the model. Let's say the list of status image entity, where we have the list of viewers. So in that viewers, we have to simply just add the current user ID and we're good to go. Based on that, we'll check the condition. If the user ID exists for that specific story in the status in the viewers list, we'll simply display the gray circular borders. Otherwise, the tab color or the greenish color that we have in the styles, which means that the story has not been seen yet by that specific user, and this is going to be the case for this scene status update. First thing first, we'll put the try catch block, and then we will access to the status collection, that specific status which stories we are about to read. Then we have to send the get request on that specific document that we have in the status collection. We can name it simply status document reference, and we can pass it in here, make it asynchronous for doing the await. Then once we send request in here, we have to access to the stories inside that specific status document that we have referenced and send the get request on that specific ID. So we got the stories list of map string dynamic, because we're going to have in the key value pairs data in the Cloud Firestore. So will be list of key value pairs that I explained in the previous video of implementing the domain layer. We just choose status.doc and got the stories, and that's it. Now we have the stories. Now we have to access to the viewers list of that specific story that we just opened for seeing it in the WhatsApp clone. So we got the viewers list variable, we got the list of string, since the field type inside the status image entity is a list of string, so that's why we did it like that. On that specific image index, because we can have multiple stories for that specific status, we can upload 4 to 5 or even 10 images, videos, stories with one status, so that will be on specific index. So that's why we will be reading it on their index. So stories on index, their viewers list. Then we will check one simple condition. If the viewers list does not contain the current user ID, the user that is seeing the status, simply will add it if it's not contained. And then the stories on the image index that viewers will become equal to the viewers list, and then we will update that status document reference stories with the newly updated stories, and that's it. One status or the other status where this method will be called will become seen, and the user ID will be added for each story viewers list. So that's what is going to happen for seen status update for each story inside that specific status, and that's it. Okay, now the update only image status. First, let's do asynchronous. First, access to the collection and then the document reference. Then put the try catch block, and then inside that check if the document already exists. So what if we want to upload one more image or video if the status already exists, which means within the 24 hours. So what we're gonna do is to access the existing status data by doing this, and then we will access the time converting into that, check if the existing status is still within its 24 hours period. If it is, this is the condition, then we are accessing to the updated stories from the status image entity by doing the same thing that we have done before, and we are adding all the stories that we will be passing to this method when we call it, and then await on that specific status ID. The stories will be the updated stories, and then the image URL will become the first image URL of the list. So that is what is going to happen in the update only status method. And lastly, for the update status, we have to make it asynchronous first, not inside but outside in here. Then simply access to the status collection, create the variable of status information, some empty map, and check for the specific fields that we want to update the conditions like that, if they were not equal to empty string or null, or simply if it was null, and this would be stories, not the images. And simply on the ID, simply call the update method with that status info, since the data will be stored inside that on that specific key when we pass some while calling the update status from our UI. So only that fields condition will be added that we want to update. So currently, if we needed some specific fields to update, we will add the fields condition in here and simply will call the update status in there. So only if in case if it's needed, but just for showing you how we can update the specific fields, we can do it like this. And for the stories, we could do it directly in here, but since we have some extra functionality, we are checking the condition based on time if it's within 24 hours. So that's why I create separate method to keep everything in isolation, means separated, so that everything does not mix up with one just single method. So with that, our remote source implementation has been completed, and if you have any question, ask me in the comment section and I would love to answer your questions. So that's it. Now we're gonna go in the presentation layer. We're gonna create the Cubit, and also one more thing would be status injection container. And here I'm just directly going to paste the qubits of the status, and I'm gonna explain it because it's going to be that simple that we had for the user and also the chat feature. So I got the get my status and the get status directories inside the qubit, and first we're gonna visit the status, and the stats are the same initial loading. In the loader we have the list of statuses and the failure same. Qubit, we have the instances of the use cases, and then passing them in the constructor. We have the get statuses method where we are first emitting the loading stat, and then we are doing this get status.call to send the request on the use case, which is going to eventually call the methods of the repository from the repository, and that repository is implemented in the data layer, and the data layer repository implementation depends upon the status remote data source, and the status remote data source is implemented in the same data layer, and everything will be connected up when we come to this part, status injection container. So that's how everything is going to happen when that specific get status is called in the UI. So once we have this variable, we are listening to the stream, and once we got the list of status entity, we are passing it to the loaded stat, and then we will load it and display it in the list view that the way we want it to display in our application. That's pretty simple method. In the catch, we are catching the socket exception and simply emitting the failure, and we'll create some UI for that if needed, and that's it for the failure when some exception occurs. And the create status delete is simply awaiting the methods like that and passing the arguments like that. That's it. And the same thing is happening in the get status, get my status. We have one single method and doing the same job that the get status is doing, but simply we are checking the condition. If the data was empty, simply return the empty entity, otherwise return its first item, and that would be only one item there of our status in here, which would be the most recent status that we uploaded in the last 24 hours. So that's it for the qubits. Now we're gonna go, and here would be the method of the status injection container. So I'm just directly copying, pasting in here in order to save our time, since you might already familiar with the things that I explained in the first and the second feature. So the things that you already know should not waste our time, right? Explanation again and again of the same thing, writing the same thing again and again is apparently the waste of time. So I got the data in the status injection container, where we have the imports of all the methods, classes that we are injecting in here. We got the qubits injection, the status passing the data in here, doing sl.call. We are registering the status qubit as the factory, which means whenever requested will give us the fresh instance, and doing the same for the other qubit, simply registering the use cases as lazy singletons, which means that will give us the instance that is already stored in the memory. So will not create every time the new one, but will give us the already stored, and the same for the others, and simply again registering the repositories as lazy singletons. So when a call is made to the status repository, it will return the status repository implementation, and when a call is made to the remote data source, the remote data source will call the remote data source implementation, and hence the firestore.call, which is already registered in the main injection container, and like that the method will reach to its ending point, and that will be triggered, and the action will be performed on the UI. And that way we are working in our clean architecture in Flutter applications. And yes, there might be more great architecture than this TDD structure like DDD and some others. So next thing, once we have the registered qubits, use cases, and the repository data sources, and now we're gonna go in the main injection container. We will await the status injection container to make it work, and lastly in the main we are simply have to provide them as status qubit and also get my status qubit, so that in the future while binding these with the UI, do not bother us that we don't have the specific qubit in the widget tree in the context, in that specific context that we are accessing it from. So once we have this, we are done with today's task of the status feature. We have implemented the domain layer, we have implemented the data layer, we have written the qubits, injected the classes, and final touches in the main injection container. And now in the next video we are gonna go ahead and bind the logic back to the my status page and the status page, and yes, we are gonna have some widgets also in the pages in the presentation layer. And yes, this is going to be the task for the next video, so you will see all the code in action that we have written up until now for the status feature. So that's it for this video. If you found this video helpful, thumbs up, a like, and subscribe for daily updates. Also drop down all of your confusions in the comment section or directly DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn.
That's it. See you in the next one.